Mom picks up puppy and ends up in the emergency. She picked their starting point and without wasting time, her husband pulled to the side of the road so they could start their adventure. The woods were wet, the air fresh. He picked up their daughter and followed her. But she suddenly stopped before an old train track, holding a hand out to him as he approached. When Macy and her husband Eddie Miller moved to Carthage, New York, they'd only wanted to start their new life as a married couple. The two New York City natives had always talked about raising their kids in a quiet neighborhood. Moving to Carthage would allow them to fulfill this dream. They had no idea what awaited them there. Macy and Eddie met at a Dungeons and Dragons event in Manhattan while still in college. They struck a friendship immediately, finding so much in common between themselves. As the months counted, it was clear that they were meant for each other. It wouldn't be long till Eddie got on one knee and popped the magic question. Their wedding was straight out of their dreams. A Dungeons and Dragons themed event, the occasion saw Macy dress in an elf-inspired wedding dress, while Eddie donned a suit meant for a tiefling noble. It's not every day you meet your soulmate, best friend, and dungeon master all rolled into one, Eddie joked while describing his wife. He'd hit the jackpot with her and would do everything to give her and their kids the best lives he could. Life in Carthage was very different from what Macy and Eddie were used to. Instead of the bustling streets of Manhattan, their house was surrounded by green lawns, peaceful driveways, and the warmth of living in a family neighborhood. A swath of trees surrounded their community. Unknown to them, what lay in those woods would change their lives forever. It was a warm morning at the beginning of spring when the incident took place. Macy and Eddie had just had their first kid, Yennefer. After spending their winter cooped up in their house, Macy thought it would be a great idea to take a drive as a family. Eddie didn't need any convincing since he early left the house as a work-from-home software engineer. This would be the perfect opportunity to witness life thaw in their neighborhood. But what they'd find would result in them speeding to the emergency room. The drive through the neighborhood was beautiful. The couple played their favorite music in their four-wheeler while rocking their daughter and enjoying the fresh air. But then Eddie, who was driving, took a turn toward the green woods. It would be the first time little Yennefer would experience Mother Nature, and he wanted it to be perfect. He didn't know what waited for them. Slowing down as he took the road cutting through the stretch of trees, Eddie asked Macy to look for the tree that would mark the start of their adventure. They'd always used their imagination while traveling, seeing themselves as magical creatures traveling new lands. But what they'd encounter would show them they were in the real world. Macy picked their starting point and Eddie pulled to the side of the road without wasting time so they could start their adventure. The woods were wet, the air fresh. Eddie picked little Yennefer as Macy led the trail. They hadn't walked far when Macy suddenly stopped before an old train track, holding a hand out to Eddie as he approached. "Quiet," she said with a childish giddiness. "You'll spook it." Eddie craned his neck above her shoulder to see what she was referring to, but couldn't catch anything. "What is it?" he asked. "Looks like a puppy," Macy said excitedly. She took out her phone and began snapping photos. But Eddie took a step back, something within him screaming at him to keep their daughter safe. He was wise to listen to the voice. Eddie was about to ask Macy what she was looking at when out of the blue, a small creature jumped out of the wet thicket before his wife. It was a shade of yellow leaning toward white and tinier than many dogs Eddie had ever seen. "I think it's a puppy," Macy said excitedly. She reached forward to get better photos when the creature turned to her, hissing before giving a cold snarl. And that's when Eddie realized what it was. Macy he bit out with as much control as he could muster. Spooking the creature was the last thing he wanted, especially with his wife and daughter in the vicinity. "That's not a puppy," Macy, Eddie grated, trying to reach for his wife's coat. He meant to call her again, to explain what they were dealing with when the creature's fur suddenly shot erect. They were in trouble. Macy went on her knees to pet the creature, but Eddie pulled her away before she could. "That's a porcupine." The creature's quills shot straight as if to punctuate his sentence, and Macy turned around with terror. She meant to run away, but her foot caught the rail, sending her tumbling. Eddie hurried to her, ensuring he'd tucked little Yennefer into his chest so the porcupine wouldn't harm her when it shot its quills. But he was too late. Eddie reached out for Macy, praying the fall didn't harm her. But one of her hands was scraped open by the rusty rail. Blood flowed freely, dirtying Macy's sleeve. "You're bleeding," Eddie said, hurrying his family out of the woods. By then, the porcupine had disappeared into the bush. Eddie would take his wife to the emergency room to check her wound. But even though the danger had passed, he'd still looked into what manner of porcupine they'd run into. What Eddie, Macy, and their daughter Yennefer encountered was an albino porcupine. Macy posted the photos of the little fella on Facebook, detailing their chance meeting with the magnificent animal. "We thought it was a puppy," she wrote excitedly under the pictures. "Turns out it was an albino porcupine. I've never seen one before. So cool."